Oh, hello. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if are we ready to go then? Okay, then let's go ahead and go. Thank you. I was looking at the chat. All right. Well, Pivette, good evening. I'm Dr. Esparza Young, and I'm so happy that you're here to spend time with me. Every time I present, I think about it as a dialogue, a conversation. So I hope that you will find this information useful. Just a couple of reminders. If you are interested in getting your certificate for attending, just make sure that you check the chat. Unlike me, check the chat at the end, and you'll be able to see that information. All right, so this presentation is called What Parenting Practices Can Help to Nurture Multilingualism. My background is in bilingual education. However, these theories and these activities are just as useful for a home wherever parents speak more than 2 languages. So let me go ahead and go back to my presentation. And I just want to make sure, thumbs up, everybody can see my presentation. I'm assuming it's yes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and continue. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and start. So this is today's agenda, and I am keeping an eye. If you see me moving, it's because I've got it here and I've got my timer. But these are the things that we're going to be talking about, because now we have so much research on the brain. We have technology that allows us to see images of the brain. We're going to talk about things that people say sometimes when you have a child or a family that speaks multiple languages, statements that sometimes people will make, which are actually not true, not accurate. I'll talk a little bit about opportunities in terms of play, a term that I coined, organic, and then just other ways that play can foster language. We'll talk a little bit about what music does for the brain and for language. Music is the closest concept to language learning. So I want to just really encourage you and support you in using music when you're trying to develop language skills at home. And then we'll talk a little bit about the research on listening and a little bit about what it means to doodle. Sometimes as a teacher, we can see kids kind of scribbling and we think, why are you scribbling? Get back to work. But that's actually a very good activity for the brain and for language development. So we'll talk about that. A little bit about me. I've been in Texas almost my entire life. My degrees and my education is from Texas. And I have a doctorate in bilingual education, and I currently teach 3rd grade. I have 15 wonderful bilingual children. I have some Spanish speakers who are trying to learn English, and I have some English speakers who are trying to learn Spanish. And this is my 31st year in education. These are my 3 children: my daughter, who is also bilingual, and my son, who's also bilingual, and my dog, who I consider to be bilingual as well. Okay, so let's get started. So let's talk a little bit about Patricia Kuhl, Dr. Patricia Kuhl's research. But Dr. Patricia Kuhl is a researcher from the University of Washington in the United States, and her research is really cutting edge. What she has done is she has placed infants in a machine and actually tracked the activity of the brain. This is very important because in language, we have had many theories, many ideas about how language is developed. Is it only a certain part of the brain? We've had traditionally 2 schools of thought. We've had behaviorist theory, which is we repeat something, we say it over and over again, and then we will eventually learn it. That is somewhat true. But then the introduction of cognitive theory, which is the idea that we think about things, and as we think about things and as we experience things, then we learn and acquire information and language in particular. Those are all true. But now that we have actual images of the brain, we know that when we say just one word, that the brain is actually processing that word in different locations. So for example, to give you an example, the word galava. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Did I? Galava? I'm looking at the chat. I believe galava means head. Okay. I'm gonna assume. I know there's a little delay, but I just want to make sure before I move forward. Okay, so assuming I didn't destroy that word, one of the reasons I remember this word is because when I first heard the word for head in Russian, it made me think of the word calabaza, which is like a pumpkin. And I remember my son was about to hit his head and somebody said galava, like his head. And so what I thought of when I heard this word is I went to different places in my mind. I thought I had an image of a pumpkin. I had a smell of food that I had eaten, pastries that have this flavor inside of it. And then I went to my library, my linguistic library, which is, Spanish, it sounds like calabaza, French, it's tête, English, it's head, and then Spanish, it's cabeza. So we know now, based on what the research of Dr. Kuhl has done, that language occurs in different places. So what I want to share with you is a little small excerpt of Dr. Kuhl's research, and this link is available to you in the presentation. So let me go ahead and stop the share and then open up here. And let's see, here it is, Dr. Kuhl. All right, so as you can see here, I'm assuming everyone can see this as well. Let me just go back a little bit. We'll be able to listen a little bit to what she says.
These are superconducting quantum interference devices to pick up the magnetic fields that change as we do our thinking. We're the first in the world to record babies in an MEG machine while they are learning. So this is little Emma. She's a 6-monther, and she's listening to various languages in the earphones that are in her ears. You can see she can move around. We're tracking her head with little pellets in a cap, so she's free to move, completely unconstrained. It's a technical tour de force. What are we seeing? We're seeing the baby brain as the baby hears a word in her language. The auditory areas light up, and then subsequently areas surrounding it that we think are related to coherence, getting the brain coordinated with its different areas, and causality, one brain area causing another to activate. We are embarking on a grand and golden age of knowledge about the child's brain development.
Okay, so let me go back to the presentation. Here, bear with me here. Present, share. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm just curious what you thought about that, because I find that to be a very incredible concept that she's looking at the brain. And something that we do know about infants is that from the moment, and this is research that has been conducted, from the moment that the infant is born, that infant will actually look at the mother's face, gestures, movements, eye movement, facial gestures, and actually imitate and mimic those gestures. This is how powerful it is for us to have that interaction with the child and what is happening actually in the brain. So let's continue. Again, these are things that we didn't know prior to having the technology to be able to look at what is actually happening in the brain. We know now, I mentioned earlier that we were talking about behaviors and thinking, but actually language development and bilingual development is multisensory, because there is a very close relationship between one language, a second language, and a third language. These two languages, if you're looking at two, are actually working together in parallel lines. One might develop more depending on its use, but they're still dependent on each other. They're still looking for similar sounds. They're still looking for similar structure. And this is why it's very, very important to foster both languages. All right, so we do know also that the brain is the only organ that continues to grow after we're born. And this is very important because the information that you're including here are actually affecting how the brain is developing. And it's prime, it's absolutely perfect if you can really develop that biliteracy, the development of both languages before the age of 13. Because as Dr. Kuhl will mention in her TED Talk, as you get older, it becomes more difficult to do that. All right, so this is what I was just talking about here. And I just wondered, I will ask very quickly in the chat, if any of you have, if any of you knew that, the brain is the only organ that continues to grow after you're born. All right, well, let's continue then. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about, sometimes a lot of parents are a little bit hesitant to have their children speak more than one language at home. They can't seem to decide, should I be speaking to them only in one? Should they only be speaking to at school another one? Should we take turns? How do we alternate? Are the children getting confused? Will they actually be delayed as a result of this? And so I wanted to share very quickly this, a little excerpt from this video of a speech pathologist that talks about the myths associated with bilingualism. Because to answer that question briefly, let me just say that children do not get confused. Children are not delayed when they speak another language. It's actually the contrary. As I said before, both languages are functioning together at the same time. And as one is more developed, then the other one kind of stops. In research theory, this is called fossilization, meaning that it just stops for a moment. But as soon as you start using it, it starts developing. So there's a constant negotiation between these two. So let's take a look at that video very quickly. Let me go ahead and make sure that I'm sharing here. Share screen. And here it is. Okay. All right, so let's listen to this doctor talk about this.
Your child will get confused learning two languages. Another one is that bilinguals are less intelligent than monolinguals. And another one that also relates to your example is that reducing to one language will improve a child's chance for success. As far as your child being a bit delayed, I think it's extremely prevalent. I think it comes from many different sources. I myself have had 2 pediatricians tell me this when they find out that we're raising our own children to be bilingual. And I, again, they do it thinking that it's helpful, but so what I heard was, well, don't be surprised. Your children may be delayed because they're learning 2 languages, and coming from a very respectable source, parents, of course, are going to believe this recommendation. And interestingly, I've looked thoroughly both for professional reasons as well as for personal reasons, and there's really no evidence indicating that this is true.
Okay, so let's talk about that for just a moment, and let me go back to the presentation. All right, so I want to make sure that everybody understands that, of course, everybody's always trying to be helpful, friends, teachers, family members often. But the fact is that children are not confused. Children will look at a concept. If we take, for example, let's say a flower, and they will look at the flower and they will understand, oh, this is a flower. But really, when we're talking about languages, all they're doing is deciding on a label for that concept, right? So they might say flor, flower, le fleur, right? So there's no confusion here. It's more just what is coming to me as quickly as possible, which is the reason why children may switch languages even within one sentence. That's called code switching. So should you speak to them in one language? What you should be doing is considering being very intentional with children when you're speaking a language. So for example, you might decide on 3 days a week, we're going to speak one language, and the other days a week, we're going to speak another language. Making sure that children value both languages. Another consideration is to be very intentional with the literacy that you're developing. So you could say, well, we read books in one language one night, and we, read a book in a different language a different night. In my own personal life, having 2 children who grew up bilingual along the US-Mexico border, what I did is I alternated both languages. I would have one day for English and one day for Spanish, and I did the same thing with reading. It was very, very important for me, for my children, not to lose Spanish. And for them, frankly, it's the second language, but it was very important for me to have that, for them to have that structure as they were growing up. And this is a very common question, so I wanted to include it here. Well, what if, for example, I want my children to learn English, but my English isn't very good? What language should I speak to them? Well, we want to encourage parents and family members to model the highest level of language. So for example, why? Because you're modeling vocabulary. So for instance, if I am very fluent in French, but I'm not, my vocabulary is limited, but my first language is Russian and my vocabulary knowledge is high, I want to use Russian because I have the highest access to academic vocabulary. And vocabulary is the foundation for good reading skills. In addition to that, literacy skills transfer. Keeping in mind that literacy skills includes speaking, reading, listening, understanding, and writing. All right, so let's continue. So let's talk a little bit about some ideas that actually foster language development, nursery rhymes, cooking, outdoor play, and social skills. Going back to the theory about how language is developed, one thing that we want to keep in mind is that all of the research shows that if you memorize something, that really is just short-term memory. It's not really going to stay with you, because we're not talking about learning language to travel, like where is the airport, what time does the train leave, where is the bathroom. We're talking about language that has practical and pragmatic applications. And in order for children to acquire and keep that in long-term memory, they have to be engaged in meaningful experiences. So let's go ahead and talk about that briefly. So one of the most common and research-based ways to support language development in the early years is through nursery rhymes. Why is that? Well, it's because it sparks some kind of feeling inside of us. I remember my father teaching me how to multiply using a nursery rhyme, and I was only 3 or 4 years old, and it was about a little doll, and I remember he sang it to me and he clapped, and then we did it in repetition, and it's something that I still remember. So I did a little bit of research on some Russian nursery rhymes. I'm going to play a couple of them, and I just want to ask really quickly if anybody remembers these, or if there's some that you'd like to share that you remember. So let me go ahead and go there. Okay, here, percent. Okay, so let's see this.
Kalinka, kalinka, kalinka maya, saduya gada malinka, malinka maya. Kalinka, kalinka, kalinka maya, saduya gada malinka, malinka maya.
Okay. I would like to know if anybody remembers that nursery rhyme, or if there's a nursery rhyme that you remember, a song that you heard when you were growing up. I'm watching the chat just to see if anybody's responding. All right. Okay, well then I'll go ahead and continue. Let's me go ahead and share. Oh, Alexandra is laughing. Okay. Do you remember any of that, Alexandra? Sure. Yes. Is that a song that you heard in school or at home? It's a folk song. Okay, thank you. I wasn't seeing the comments. I'm sorry, I was on the wrong tab. Let me go ahead and share another one, and then let me know if you are familiar with this one. Oh, okay, it's not a nursery rhyme, it's just a song. Okay, yeah, we definitely had songs that we used to play, like when we would spin around outside. So was it a song that was just sung, or just a song that was used to play? Oh, everywhere. Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I hadn't clicked on the comments box. I was missing all this input. I apologize. See if I can go back a little bit. You can ask. Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Let me go back. Oh, Zarina, and does that make you feel something? Does it bring back some memories for you? Yes. Yes. Perfect. I love this. Thank you so much for answering. This is great. Okay, let me share another one. Oh, it's just a folk song. And then you can tell me if this is a song that you recognize. So here's another one. Here we go.
Чунга-чанга, синий небосвод, чунга-чанга, лев круглый год, чунга-чанга, весело живет.
Okay, I can't wait to hear what y'all have to say about this one. Chunga chunga. I love it. Yes, this is what I was hoping for. Yes. So you see, I'm not fluent in Russian, but I'm already thinking chunga chunga. I'm already remembering that. What does that mean exactly? Yes, exactly. Yes. So that's the idea, is to use music, to use the movements, because there's a lot of research that shows that movement also helps you remember things. There's a lot of research behind that. So when you're trying to teach language to your children, use music, use movements, use gestures, and then anything like that is actually very helpful. And of course, if you can do it in a social setting, that's even better. Oh, I'm so happy that that you remembered that. Okay, let's continue. Here we go. All right. So this is what we were just talking about, nursery rhymes around the world. And I went ahead and linked some of these in here. And there's a The first link is actually nursery rhymes around the world. Let me go ahead and share that one with you here. Stop screen, present. Here it is. This is a very popular website, and it has actual nursery rhymes from all over the world, because if you are trying to encourage other languages as well, and I've actually looked at these myself, being Mexican and Spanish ones, and they're all very accurate and on point, culturally speaking. All right, so let's continue here. I wanted to make sure that everybody could see that. Oh, it's like a name of a little boy. Okay, thank you. Wonderful. All right, let's continue. So another very good way to actually foster language is by cooking. You might think, well, you know, do I really want to put my child in the kitchen? Yes, even in the most simple way, if it's, you know, preparing the flour or using the sugar or making a list when I go to the grocery store, or if it's, you know, maybe writing things down or tasting. Remember that language development is actually multisensory. So I found this because this is supposed to be a sort of popular Russian treat. Is that correct? Does this look familiar to all of you? We have our own candies in Mexican culture that we use a lot, and I just wondered here from the chat if anybody recognizes this or if you've ever prepared this at home. Oh, Chunga Chunga, it's the island, I see. Okay, well, let me, marmalade, yes. Yes, I think so, yes. Yes, yes, I will be more than happy. All the links, I believe they're going to make the presentation available to everybody. Jelly fruit, yes, we call them gomitas. These are very popular also. Okay, wonderful. So again, just being able to do this with your children, I call it organic play, because organic meaning that it's just happening very naturally, and I don't actually have to create anything that is out of the realm of my knowledge. It can be very meaningful with a grandmother or an aunt or with my father or my siblings to do this. So let me go ahead and continue with the presentation. All right, so what kind of outdoor games? This is another thing. It's watching kids not only create games, but actually play in games. And I want to share this with you. There is very good research too that shows that even video games will foster language ability and listening skills for those of us who have grown up being concerned about our children playing video games. There's actually some research out there that shows that doctors, surgeons who grow up playing video games are more precise because of the mobility that they use when they're using the console. I can't believe that, but it's actually true. So let's talk a little bit about some of the games that maybe you played when you were a kid and how those games actually help to foster language as well. So let's take a look here. So there's this one, traffic signal, and I wondered if anybody remembers this game. And that's when in the United States we call this green light, red light, which means everybody's in a line, and let's say 3 or 4, and then you say green light and people go, and then you say red light and people stop, and then depending on people who do not know which light it is, it actually, you start getting kicked out of the game. So let me share that again here. I looked this up, and this is supposed to be a traditional game that's played in Russia, where the different colors are called out and the kids have to look for those colors. But let me pause here to see if any of you remember your games that you played when you were a child outside. Tag, freeze, touching somebody and then they have to freeze. Do any of you remember playing those games as children? And while you answer, let me show you this one too, which is 12 Sticks. It's a hide and seek game. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and why are these games so important? Well, because they foster language. Children are learning social skills, negotiation skills. There is very good research by Dr. Angela Valenzuela, a University of Texas. Gorodki. Oh, what's Gorodki? Is that like tag or hide and seek? 12 Sticks. Okay. All right. Yay. I'm really happy. So there's very good research from Dr. Valenzuela from the University of Texas at Austin. She did some research that showed that was really about, Red Rover is a good one too, that was about where do children who are learning a second language, who are immigrants, where do they learn more from? What information do they find most useful? And it turns out that children find the information the most useful to them from the language that they learn or the information that they learn from their peers. So it's very similar with something that we get as an adult. If I go to class and I don't really know the answer to something, I might ask my teacher, but I'm more likely to turn to my classmate and say, what did she say? I didn't really understand. Or what did I miss? Or I hear a word and then I stop completely because I'm just frozen on that word. And so I might turn to my friend and say, what was that word? That is because we feel more comfortable with our own peers. And as children get older, then of course, they will continue to rely on their peers to learn and gain information. So the more we structure this, the more we foster these social interactions, the more that we're actually fostering language as well. Okay, thank you so much for sharing those things with me. Okay, so here's an example from a bilingual classroom. This is actually Spanish. It's a journal. It's a very, very simple journal where the child just took a leaf, put it on the paper, they traced it, they colored it, and then they wrote the word leaf, and then they put the date on there, as you can see. There are so many opportunities for children to discover things, and they can be things that are every day at the house or just on our way to school or in the car as we're looking at things around us in the environment, keeping in mind that our presentation focuses on how can we nurture, right? Children are born with a lot of different abilities, but what we're talking about is nurturing. In other words, the environment. How can I foster and promote an environment that is language rich? Okay. Oh, Cowboys and Indians. Kazakhs. Yes, I saw this one too. I did. Kazakhs and I did see that. That's true. They do have special names that are hard to translate. Yes, that is true. Yes, yes. Okay, so let's continue. Again, there's an opportunity for children to play. There is a organization called the International Play Association where you can actually also find a lot of information about play. So let me go ahead and share that with you too. It's right here. Right here. And there is tons and tons of information and journals and websites and resources related to play. So for example, if you are in a school where recess exists or doesn't exist, there's a really good resource here, information on how to develop that, because you actually want to make sure you promote it. In the United States and in Texas, recess is mandatory. Just to kind of make sure that everybody understands what I'm saying and what it means here. Recess just means that children are given a specific amount of time to just go outside and play. So for example, the school that I work in has 2 recesses. It has one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and children just, they play. There's no specific agenda. Do you have recess within your communities? As the way that I described it, where children are allowed to just go play and there's no structure, there's nothing specific that they have to do? Oh, the elastic band. Yes, I'm looking at that also. Okay, so while you're answering, let me go ahead and continue. So here are some examples of things that you can use, because children will recognize everyday items in order to develop language. This was actually an idea that was created by a teacher. This is I think a pre-kinder teacher. Pre-kinder here is at the age of 4. And she just took a cereal box and opened it. And on the other side, she created little symbols, and the children could hear either the letter or they could hear the word, and then they would recognize like the word, and they would put like a little bean on there. Does anybody recognize this cereal box? I don't know if you have it. It was my favorite when I was growing up. Fruit Loops. Actually came with a song, Follow Your Nose, It Always Knows. All right, well then I will just continue because I don't want to run out of time. All right, we're doing really well. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. So this is a very simple activity that can be created. Here is the little Ziploc that the teacher created, just again using more cereal boxes. And those little cereal boxes are actually the little flashcards. I'm sorry, the cards that have the letter, and then the kids actually play with each other using the letters. But again, they get very excited because they recognize a lot of the images that they're already familiar with. You know, something that if you haven't noticed this, consider it when you go to the grocery store. Notice how they lay out the products. There are products that are for adults at the eye level, but if you ever decide just squat down like you're trying to find something on the ground, you'll notice that grocery stores will place all of the children's products at the very bottom because it's their eye level that they're aiming for. And so this is all very, very important. Children notice things, but they're not at our height. They're at a lower level. And so we want to keep that in mind. Like, what are they observing when we're not actually observing? Oh, wonderful. Time Dominoes in English is an amazing game. Wonderful. Thank you. I love all these ideas. All right, let's continue. So what are some everyday items that I could use that are around my house? I just wanted to show you some examples. So for example, for me, I grew up without a washer and a dryer. These are clothespins, the kind you use to hang the clothes after you've dried them. But children recognize these, right? They may not know the word for this particular item. And again, it's an opportunity for you to say, oh, you know, we use this for this reason, and then you actually say the word. But in this case, what the teacher has done is she colored some of the clothespins in one color for one language, and then she used another color for the other language. Yes, yes. But I have to say to Ksenia, play is such an important part of language development, and also physiologically, in terms of the oxygen that is utilized when children are playing, and in terms of movement, all of that actually fosters language development. So it's something to keep in mind if you want to promote that at your school and in your community. So as you can see here, and brings up a very important point, and that is that it's very important that children honor and value each language. This is the reason why the teacher has used color for each specific language. In my home, when my children were growing up, I would have labels all around the house, and the labels for one language were in blue, the labels for the other language were in red. This way they always knew, oh, this is English, oh, this is Spanish, and they felt that each of them was equal in value. All right. Oh, I see. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's continue. So this is another thing that I grew up doing because I didn't have toys growing up, and this is actually an activity that I'm doing right now with my third graders, and they love it. It's a shoebox. And so what I had, this activity was actually created when I taught at the university. I asked my students to bring a shoebox, and then I had them create either a room in their house or their actual house. And so you can see here, one student used the shoebox and created like a little sofa, a pizza, a little TV. I was so impressed by these shoebox models. I was blown away. And then the other one has a little dresser, and it has a TV. And actually what he wrote there that says TV novelas that means TV soap operas, because Mexican soap operas are very famous around the world. And so you can see here what happens when you allow a child to do this. Well, you're building it together, you're talking about it, you're planning, you're using these high order thinking skills, right? Because you're planning, you're creating, you're organizing, you are discussing it, you're looking at the math associated with it, you are visualizing. And this is something that's also research-based, but we do forget this. Visualization is how we process information. I can say a word to you, and you will have an image in your brain about what that word is, and it will go to different parts of your brain as well. So you don't actually have to spend a lot of money. It can just be something very simple like this, to encourage children to use language in different ways. All right, so let's continue. So this is a container of butter that has been repurposed. And so essentially what we have placed in here are things that begin with the letter B. So it's B for butter. We just put a little post-it there that says B. And then inside are items that begin with the letter B, like bubbles, beret, and ball. And there's probably something, oh, a button. There's a button in there. And again, this was something that was created by a pre-K teacher. Children were at the age of 4. And the children get so excited when they see the container because they recognize the container. It's a container that's used in households. And then they open it and they begin to discuss the items that were in there. And they kind of start saying, well, I know what this is. And then they begin to see the commonality of the word, right, as they're sharing it and they're talking about it. And it's not something that actually costs any money. That's wonderful, Ksenia. That's great. And it's so easy to do, right? And you can even ask children to bring things, and you can start putting them in there. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about invented language. And so it's really important that we not necessarily correct children as they're developing language. We want to really encourage them to use language. something that I like to say to students or people who are learning another language is that when you're learning, it's not really a mistake, because what you're really doing is you're trying to kind of improve it every single time, right? So what do I do if I say to a child, and so here I'm going to use my very rusty Russian, but the first Russian word that I learned was собака. Did I say that right? Собака? I think it means dog. Did I say that correctly? Yes, perro. That's right. That's right. So sometimes I would say it, and I would say it in a very Texan way, salvaca, but it's faster. I'm sure it's much faster. And I learned that word because I have a dog, and I had my dog with me when I was living abroad, and it allowed me to. It was a very meaningful word, and people kept pointing at it and pointing at it and pointing at it, and it sounded like a word that I knew in Spanish. And I thought, they can't be saying that word. They just can't be. And it's a slang word in Spanish, which means armpit. And I thought, I think they're trying to tell me that I smell bad. But it was, no, they were pointing at the dog. And that's why I remember that word. So what should you do? If a child says a word incorrectly, then what you want to do is you just want to model it. You want to model the correct word so that they hear the correct word, and then they can repeat it after you. But you definitely want to encourage them to use the words. So let me go ahead and share another resource here that's in the presentation, and that's invented language. So here it is. So this resource is very good because it helps us to kind of remember that children are sometimes making up words and making up the spelling because they might be hearing it a certain way, so they're writing it a certain way. And we have to just make sure that we're very mindful that there are different stages of development as children are learning language. Okay, so it isn't necessarily wrong, but we want to use the word development as we're moving forward in that timeline. Okay, so let's continue here. Okay, all right, so logos. Something that children notice a lot are logos, and that is everything that is in the environment. You know, they might see something and they'll say, oh, I know, that's the store, or that's my favorite restaurant, or that's where we go to get gasoline, or that's where we pick up, you know, the milk or whatever, because they recognize logos. And so I went ahead and found this one, which even if children don't know how to read this, right? But they'll look at it and say, oh, that's coffee. You know, they may not recognize all the letters. They may not be reading that, but they'll look at it and they'll say, I know exactly what that is, right? So there's all these opportunities for children to actually be using language as they're moving along. Let's look at the next one. This one, I understand that, is this a popular product? Savaka. I've seen that. Thank you. So glad I didn't mess up Savaka. And it happens. I remember my children being in the grocery store, and they would know exactly. It's so. Okay, thank you. It's being in the grocery store and then just picking it up, and just because they recognize the packaging, they don't necessarily have to read. So we want to keep in mind what's called print-rich environment. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. All right, so let's continue. So just keep that in mind. So let's also talk about how music is connected to language. And here, so I want to share with you a little bit about the music and the brain. And these are things that we were talking about in terms of movement and what happens in the brain whenever we listen to music and how that's so closely related to language learning as well.
Those hours of learning, practice, and performing. Spoke with a therapist who used music to help former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords learn to speak again, and got a glimpse inside the brain of a 2-time Grammy-winning artist while he played. All to find out how music affects us. So what's going on when we listen to music? We visited the USC Brain and Creativity Institute, where I had my head examined, literally, to try to figure it out. I'm going to go into this fMRI machine. A tiny tube will surround me. We'll get a baseline reading of my brain, and then I'm going to listen to some music, and we're going to see how my brain responds.
Just close your eyes, relax, and try and get into the music as best you can, okay?
And here's what we saw. These are scans of my brain. The areas in red are where my activity is above average, in blue, below average. And as you can see, there's red activity all over my brain, not just in one specific area.
25 years ago, the idea was that language is in the left side of the brain and music is in the right side of the brain. But now that we've got better quality tools, higher resolution neuroimaging, and better experimental methods, we've discovered that's not at all right.
How does that play out in different regions of the brain?
When music enters and then gets shuttled off to different parts of the brain, it stops at specialized processing units in auditory cortex. They track loudness and pitch and rhythm and timbre and things like that. There's visual cortex activation when you're reading music as a musician or watching music. Motor cortex when you're tapping your feet, snapping your fingers, clapping your hands. The cerebellum, which mediates the emotional responses. The memory system in the hippocampus, hearing a familiar passage, finding it somewhere in your memory banks. Music is going on in both halves of the brain, the left.
Okay, so thank you for talking about the invented language link. It's in the presentation, and let me just share it really quickly, just so that you can see it. Invented language, here it is, invented spelling. That's the one that you were asking me about, and it is in the presentation as well. All right, so let me go back to the presentation. Yes, thank you. All right. So I wanted to let that video go a little bit longer because the research on music is so powerful and so innovative. And as you heard, we're talking about all the different parts of the brain that are activated. And it's very, very important to use music as much as we can whenever we're trying to foster and promote language. All right, so let me go back to the presentation. Oh, I think I had the presentation, sorry. All right. And so what are some other things that we can use? And I think this is one of my favorite things to share. I had the privilege to work with Native Americans in Alaska. And as you can see here, this was a performance that was taking place at a school in the evening. You know, for many communities, the schools are the heart of a community. The elders or the grandparents are welcomed, and children are actually trying to preserve and maintain their own language by using dance, by using traditional songs, by using movements. And something that we want to keep in mind is how can we incorporate our family members who have passed on stories and songs and dances, and how can we incorporate that into our own language environment? This is very, very important. All right, so let me go ahead and go on to the last one, and then I'll take any questions that you have here. So here we go. And this is a little bit of research on doodling. So a lot of the times, you know, teachers might say, well, you know, you need to pay attention. You just got your pencil and your pen and you're just kind of, you know, not you're moving something over here. That's what we call doodling. But it's very, very important to know the research on this as well. Actually, what a study in Harvard found is that children or anybody, adults who actually doodle, and I wrote a paper on this about medical students and mapping. So what happens is when the brain, and when you actually start taking your pencil or your crayon or your pen and you start scribbling around, what happens is your brain is taking a break. And there is still thinking that's happening. There is still processing that's happening. And so what we know is that it's okay. And it is, again, how we learn. It's that visualization process. So I wanted to make sure that I shared that information with you as well. As I said, all of the links here are in the presentation. So let me continue here. And the final thing that I wanted to share with you is the National Association of Early and Young Children. This is a national organization in the United States that is related to fostering best practices for early childhood. Let me go ahead and share that here so you can see it as well, so that you can at least see the visual of it. Yes, here it is. And parents, there's a very rich resource area related to what parents do to foster language development in more than one language. And there's very good ideas related to that as well. So if you're interested in that, that's available to you here also. So let me go back to the presentation. All right. Okay, and that is it. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, I will let the administrators know if they want to share anything or say anything, but I'm available and the presentation is available. And just a reminder to check the chat if you need to have the certificate. But thank you so much for interacting with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.